On the desolate world of Orvith, an unforgiving wasteland of jagged mountains and crimson skies, Zarathia lay battered and bleeding. Her once majestic wings, their membranes shimmering with hues of silver and gold, were now torn and lifeless. The ground beneath her quaked with the faint echoes of retreating starships, leaving nothing behind but silence. Silence, and the slow drip of her blood pooling onto the scorched earth. The Vrymatha had once soared as legends, their telepathic wisdom guiding the galaxy through centuries of peace. But legends are fragile in a universe ruled by greed. The galactic powers, the Syndicate hegemony and the Zynar Collective, had fought over Orvith for decades, valuing its minerals far more than its inhabitants. Once revered as protectors, Zarathia's kind had been reduced to mercenaries, their numbers dwindling with each passing cycle. Zarathia had fought valiantly, leading the charge to hold the cliffs of Zevarak, a strategic point coveted by both factions. Her fire had rained down upon enemy forces, her roar shaking the skies. But even her formidable strength had its limits. When her flank was overwhelmed and her body struck by enemy artillery, she fell. And in that moment of vulnerability, her supposed allies turned their backs. As the Syndicate forces withdrew, Zarathia reached out with her mind. Her telepathic cry rippled across the battlefield, a desperate plea to her comrades. Help me! I have fought for you. I have bled for you. Do not leave me here! But the response was deafening silence. Through her dimming vision, she saw their ships ascend, their engines roaring as they vanished into the ashen sky. She felt their disdain as clearly as if they had spoken. The Vrymatha were relics of a forgotten age, expendable tools in a war that cared nothing for honor or loyalty. Dragging her shattered body toward a jagged outcrop for cover, Zarathia replayed the moments leading to this betrayal. Her species had been doomed the moment they trusted the galaxy to value anything other than power. She thought of her ancestors, of the Golden Age when the Vrymatha were sought not for their might but for their wisdom. A bitter laugh escaped her bloodied snout. That world was gone, and so too, it seemed, was she. Her mind reeled, torn between fury and despair. Every breath burned, her chest heaving with the effort to stay conscious. She gazed at the horizon, a blood-red expanse where the sun began to set, bathing Orvith in an eerie glow. How fitting, she thought, that her end would mirror her species' downfall, alone, forgotten, and discarded like debris. Still, instinct pushed her forward. With trembling limbs, she reached the shadow of the canyon. Here, at least, she could rest. Yet rest brought little solace. Pain coursed through her body, a constant reminder of the wounds that would never heal without aid. She reached out again, her mind brushing against the empty void, hoping, praying, that someone, anyone, would answer. But the galaxy had turned its back. As her strength waned, fragments of memory flickered in her mind. A hatchling learning to fly under her mother's watchful eye. The first time she felt the vast, collective presence of her species' telepathic song. The thrill of flight, unburdened by war or obligation. These were memories of a life long past, a life stolen by forces far beyond her control. The stars above began to blur, her vision darkening. Zarathia closed her eyes, prepared to let the void take her. She had no reason to fight anymore, no allies to live for. What remained of her kind would soon follow her into oblivion, and the galaxy would forget the Vrymatha ever existed. But then, faintly, she felt it, a pulse of life. Weak at first, like the faint whisper of a breeze in a storm. Her mind strained, reaching for the source. It was different from the cold, calculating presences she had encountered before. This was raw, unrefined. And yet, it burned with a curious warmth, a fire unlike anything she had felt in decades. Her eyes flickered open, and she strained to lift her head. In the distance, a glimmer of light descended from the heavens. It was not Syndicate, nor Zynar. This was something else entirely. As the light drew closer, Zarathia's heart stirred with an unfamiliar emotion, hope. The human expedition crew had arrived on Orvith expecting desolation, not life. Their mission was straightforward: scout for resources, chart the unclaimed terrain, and avoid entanglement in the galaxy's endless disputes. Yet, As Captain Elias Carter surveyed the barren landscape through the viewport of their lander, a faint signal caught his attention. Weak and erratic, it pulsed like a fading heartbeat. It was Dr. Lyra Monroe, their xenobiologist, who recognized its origin. "This isn't mechanical," she said, her voice a mix of curiosity and concern. "It's organic. Something alive is calling for help." The crew debated their next move. They were explorers, not medics, and their supplies were limited. Still, something about the signal tugged at them. "If it's alive out there," Carter finally said, "it deserves a chance. We've come too far to ignore it." Guided by the signal, the team landed near a craggy canyon, the lander's thrusters kicking up clouds of ash. It didn't take long for them to find her. The creature lay in the shadow of a jagged cliff, her massive frame unmistakable even in its broken state. Zarathia was a sight both magnificent and harrowing. Her scales, dulled and cracked, shimmered faintly under the planet's weak sunlight. Each labored breath rattled like a distant storm. Dr. Monroe approached cautiously, her scanner trembling in her hand. The readings confirmed what she suspected. This was no ordinary creature. "Of Rhymatha," she whispered, awe and disbelief in her voice. The humans had heard legends of these telepathic, dragon-like beings, but most assumed they were extinct or myth. Zarathia stirred weakly, her head lifting just enough to lock her gaze on the humans. Her telepathic voice reached them, faint but laced with steel. Asterisk. "Leave. I have nothing to give you." Asterisk. But Carter stepped forward, his tone firm yet calm. "We're not here to take. We're here to help." The statement puzzled Zarathia. Help was a concept she no longer associated with others, let alone these fragile, unarmed beings. Yet, despite her mistrust, she lacked the strength to resist. She watched warily as the humans began their work. The crew's medical officer, armed with a kit designed for far less complex species, faced an uphill battle. Zarathia's physiology defied their understanding. Her blood coagulated differently, her scales resisted traditional tools, and her vital signs operated on frequencies their equipment barely registered. Yet they adapted. They improvised. They refused to give up. Dr. Monroe knelt by Zarathia's side, her hands steady as she applied a makeshift solution to one of the creature's wounds. "You're not just a survivor," she murmured. "You're a miracle." Her words carried no expectation, only sincerity. Zarathia felt the warmth of it, so foreign after years of indifference and betrayal. Through fragmented telepathic impressions, Zarathia probed the humans' minds, seeking their motives. What she found baffled her. Their thoughts were not driven by conquest or self-interest. Instead, they were filled with fleeting glimpses of their struggles, wars fought for survival, the pain of loss, and an unyielding determination to endure. They were not like the Syndicate or Zynar. They were different. As the humans worked tirelessly to stabilize her, their conversations revealed more about their nature. Carter, with his steady leadership, spoke of battles he had left behind on Earth, choosing exploration over destruction. Monroe shared stories of her fascination with alien life, driven not by exploitation but by wonder. Each human brought something unique, their collective effort painting a picture of a species that thrived on resilience and unity. Despite her wariness, Zarathia began to see glimpses of their potential. There was something raw and untamed about these humans, something that defied the rigid hierarchies and cold logic of the galaxies she had known. They were small and fragile, yet their spirits burned with a fire that refused to be extinguished. For the first time in years, Zarathia felt a flicker of something she had long buried, curiosity. Why were these creatures risking so much for her? What drove them to act with such conviction in a galaxy that rewarded only self-preservation? As the day turned to night, the humans set up a temporary camp near the canyon, their equipment humming softly in the stillness. Zarathia, though far from healed, felt a faint strength returning. She observed them silently, their movements efficient yet filled with an unspoken camaraderie. They laughed despite their exhaustion, shared stories despite the danger, and worked as if their lives depended not just on survival but on understanding. Before drifting into a restless sleep, Zarathia reached out once more, this time not to push them away but to ask the question that had been gnawing at her mind. Asterisk. Why do you help me? You owe me nothing. Asterisk. It was Monroe who answered, her voice carrying the quiet determination of her kind. Because no one else will. Zarathia's recovery was slow, her body still weak, but her mind grew sharper with each passing hour. The humans stayed close, tending to her wounds, though she still watched them with guarded suspicion. Their actions were puzzling. They showed no fear despite her size and strength. Instead, they worked tirelessly, using crude tools and improvised techniques, determined to keep her alive. She observed them in silence, their behavior strange yet intriguing. Humans were unlike any species she had encountered. They bickered over minor details but laughed moments later. They complained about the harsh conditions yet continued their work without hesitation. They seemed fragile, even reckless, but there was a stubborn resilience in everything they did. It was both frustrating and fascinating. Through their telepathic connection, Zarathia began to see fragments of their lives, snippets of thoughts and memories they couldn't shield from her probing mind. A woman standing defiantly against the wind, clutching a torn flag. A child staring at the stars, dreaming of a future beyond Earth. A man holding a shattered tool, repairing it with ingenuity instead of discarding it. These images were fleeting, yet they told a story of a species that thrived on persistence, on turning adversity into opportunity. The humans, in turn, grew curious about her. Dr. Lyra Monroe often asked questions, her tone respectful but eager. What was your home like before all this? Before the war? Zarathia hesitated before answering, unsure if they deserved to know. But something about their sincerity compelled her to speak, her telepathic voice carrying images rather than words. She showed them Orvith as it once was, a world of vibrant skies and endless forests, where her kind flew freely, their telepathic song resonating across the planet. She revealed the Vrymatha's role as peacekeepers, their efforts to unite the galaxy through wisdom rather than force. But she didn't shy away from the darker truths, the jealousy their power inspired, the wars that decimated their numbers, and the betrayal that left them scattered and broken. The humans listened intently, their expressions a mix of wonder and sadness. Carter, the most pragmatic of the group, was the first to speak. You were betrayed by those who feared you. Sounds familiar. His tone was bitter, hinting at a shared history of mistrust and conflict. Zarathia sensed the weight of his words and realized how much these humans had endured. They were no strangers to betrayal or loss. Trust began to grow in the shared silence between them. It wasn't something Zarathia gave easily, but the humans' persistence made it hard to ignore. They didn't treat her as a weapon or a relic. They treated her as something worth saving, something more than her wounds and history. It was a feeling she hadn't known in centuries. One evening, while the humans worked on repairing a piece of their equipment, Zarathia extended a question of her own. Asterisk. Why do you struggle so much? Your kind is weak, your lives fleeting. Why do you persist in a galaxy that seeks to crush you? Asterisk. Dr. Monroe paused, glancing at Carter before answering. Because giving up isn't in our nature. We don't survive because we're the strongest or the smartest. We survive because we don't stop trying. Her words carried a quiet conviction that lingered in Zarathia's mind long after the conversation ended. The days passed, and their bond deepened. Zarathia began to help in small ways, offering advice on Orvitha's dangerous terrain and warning them of approaching predators. In one instance, she used what little strength she had to shield them from a sudden storm, her massive wings providing shelter against the raging winds. The humans, in turn, shared their limited resources, rationing food and water despite their own scarcity. But not all moments were easy. Zarathia's pride often clashed with their insistence on helping her. She struggled to accept their kindness, fearing it came with hidden motives. Yet, each time she questioned their actions, they proved her wrong. Their compassion was genuine, their willingness to stand by her unwavering. The telepathic connection between them grew stronger, allowing Zarathia to see more of their inner worlds. She witnessed their fears, their dreams, and their determination to carve out a place in the galaxy. In return, she shared fragments of her own mind, memories she hadn't revisited in centuries. The humans didn't judge her past, they embraced it, seeing her not as a relic but as a survivor. Despite her initial doubts, Zarathia began to feel something she hadn't in years: hope. The humans were small and imperfect, but they carried something extraordinary within them, a fire that refused to be extinguished. For the first time since the war, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, her kind's story wasn't over. But their fragile peace was soon interrupted. Late one night, while the camp was quiet, Zarathia sensed a disturbance on the edge of her telepathic range. A cold, familiar presence brushed against her mind, a Syndicat probe, scouting the area. They had found her. She shared the revelation with the humans, her voice laced with urgency. Asterisk. They are coming. And they won't stop until we're all dead. Asterisk. Carter's expression hardened. Then we make sure they regret it. There was no hesitation in his voice, only determination. Zarathia studied him, this small, fragile creature who stood defiant against forces far beyond his strength. She felt an unfamiliar emotion stir within her, admiration. The humans began to prepare, their movements swift and coordinated. Zarathia, still weakened, knew she couldn't fight as she once had. But she also knew she couldn't let them face this alone. For the first time in centuries, she chose to stand beside someone, not out of obligation, but out of trust. As the Syndicat forces drew closer, Zarathia felt the weight of the moment. She had been abandoned, betrayed, and left to die. But these humans, these fragile beings with their stubborn hearts, had given her a reason to fight again. And she wouldn't let them down. The Syndicat forces descended on Orvith like a storm, their ships darkening the skies and their machines tearing through the barren landscape. Zarathia could feel their presence pressing against her mind, cold and calculating. This was no simple retrieval mission. They intended to annihilate her and anyone who stood in their way. The humans, though outnumbered and outgunned, didn't flinch. Their preparations had been swift, and now they stood together, ready to face the oncoming assault. Carter's voice was steady as he addressed his crew. We've faced worse odds before. Stick to the plan, and we'll get through this. Zarathia listened, her sharp senses catching the unspoken tension in their words. They were afraid, yes, but they weren't defeated. Fear seemed to fuel them rather than paralyze them. It was a trait she had rarely seen, even among the strongest of her kind. The humans had devised a series of traps and defensive measures, using what little they had to turn the canyon into a makeshift fortress. They used the terrain to their advantage, placing explosives in narrow choke points and creating barriers from fallen rocks. Zarathia, still recovering, positioned herself at the heart of their defenses. Though her body ached with every movement, she knew she could not sit idle while they fought for her. As the Syndicat forces approached, the first wave of drones surged forward, their sleek forms glinting under the pale light. The humans sprang into action. Monroe triggered a series of explosions, collapsing a section of the canyon and forcing the drones into a bottleneck. Carter and his team took precise shots, their weapons cutting through the swarm. Zarathia watched their efficiency with a mixture of awe and disbelief. They fought like a single entity, their trust in one another absolute. But the Syndicat's forces were relentless. As the second wave advanced, Zarathia unleashed her fire for the first time since her injury. The flames roared through the canyon, consuming the drones in a blinding inferno. The effort drained her, but she held her ground, her presence a shield for the humans. They didn't retreat or falter, instead adapting their strategy to complement her attacks. Amid the chaos, Zarathia sensed the arrival of Syndicat elites, heavily armed combat units designed for destruction. They moved with precision, cutting through the humans' defenses with brutal efficiency. One of their machines fired a concentrated energy blast, aimed directly at Carter's position. Without hesitation, Zarathia surged forward, her massive wings shielding him from the blast. The impact sent shockwaves through her body, but she stood firm, her determination unshaken. Carter glanced up at her, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. "We've got your back. Don't burn out on us now." His words, simple yet earnest, struck a chord within her. For so long, she had fought alone, believing she could rely on no one. But these humans, fragile as they were, had proven otherwise. They didn't see her as a weapon or a relic. They saw her as an ally. The battle raged on, each moment a test of their resilience. Zarathia pushed herself to the brink, her telepathic abilities amplifying the humans' coordination. She shared her knowledge of syndicate tactics, guiding their movements and exposing weaknesses in the enemy's lines. The humans, in turn, used their ingenuity to exploit every opportunity, their resourcefulness turning the tide in their favor. As the syndicate forces began to falter, their leader, a towering mech piloted by one of their commanders, entered the fray. Its weapons were devastating, its armor nearly impenetrable. Zarathia knew this was the syndicate's final gambit, their attempt to crush all resistance in one decisive blow. She also knew she couldn't face it alone. Monroe, ever the strategist, devised a plan. "We'll draw its fire. Zarathia, you go for the core. It's the only chance we've got." The humans moved into position, their actions coordinated and precise. Zarathia hesitated for a moment, the weight of the task bearing down on her. But then she saw them, small, fragile, yet unyielding. If they could stand against this, so could she. With a surge of determination, Zarathia launched herself into the air. Her wings, though battered, carried her with a power she hadn't felt in years. The mech turned its weapons on her, its cannons roaring, but she dodged with a grace born of centuries of flight. The humans kept its attention divided, their relentless assault creating openings for her to strike. Zarathia's flames scorched the mech's exterior, but its core remained intact. She dove closer, her claws tearing through layers of reinforced metal. The mech retaliated, its energy blasts grazing her wings and side. Pain shot through her, but she pressed on, her resolve unbreakable. Finally, she reached the core. With a roar that shook the canyon, she drove her claws into it, unleashing a surge of energy that ripped through the mech. The machine collapsed, its systems failing in a cascade of sparks and smoke. The remaining syndicate forces, leaderless and disoriented, retreated. As the dust settled, Zarathia landed heavily, her body trembling with exhaustion. The humans gathered around her, their faces a mix of relief and admiration. Carter extended a hand, his voice steady despite his own weariness. "We couldn't have done it without you." Zarathia looked at them, these small, fragile beings who had fought so fiercely beside her. For the first time in centuries, she felt a sense of belonging. "No," she said, her telepathic voice filled with quiet strength. Asterisk. "We did this together." Asterisk. The battle was over, but their journey was just beginning. Zarathia knew the syndicate would return, and the galaxy's dangers were far from gone. But for the first time, she didn't feel alone. The humans had given her more than their help, they had given her hope. Together, they would face whatever came next, their alliance a testament to the power of trust and resilience in a galaxy that had tried to break them both.